Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I hope you guys are well. My name is Amna, and I am the Outreach Officer of Islamic Arts and Heritage Society in the University of Birmingham. I will be hosting this event for today. We will not be taking attendance for this first session. We will start taking attendance from the second session. Sorry for the confusion. We initially wanted to do it over Zoom, but then the number of people interested in this course was very high, so we're doing it over YouTube. Sorry for the confusion as well. We will have a short quiz at the end with the prizes. Quiz link will be sent through the chat near the end, inshallah. I'm going to briefly introduce our guest, Dr. Khalid Al-Awaisi, inshallah. Jazakallah khair, Dr. Khalid. Thank you for giving us this talk, and thank you for being here today. So Dr. Khalid is a lecturer in the early Muslim history at Artuklu University. He completed his postgraduate in research of Islamic Jerusalem in 2003. Then his PhD dissertation was mapping Islamic Jerusalem. He was a director at the Islamic Jerusalem Research Center between 2011 to 2007 to 2011 in Britain. He was also assistant professor at Aberdeen University in 2006. This project started with our society just last year, and it gained a lot of attention and was very successful. Therefore, we decided to make it into a course with a certificate thanks to many supporters, and we collaborated with different societies and organizations in the UK and outside, alhamdulillah. Everyone, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comment section, and we will answer them toward the end, inshallah. And if we have a very amount of questions, we will do a special event where we have questions and answers, inshallah. Thank you for being here today. Okay, Dr. Khalid.
Okay, thank you very much, Amna, for this introduction. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. First of all, I would like to thank all the societies and organizations joining together for this noble cause for Bayt al-Maqdis, Palestine, and Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. And over the next 10 classes, we will be covering numerous topics, putting the Islamic dimension into the history and importance of Bayt al-Maqdis. Let me first start with a general introduction. Today's talk will be a general introduction into the importance of Al-Aqsa and the importance of Bayt al-Maqdis within history, Islam, and much more. Our discussion will focus on numerous points, mainly around the idea of the importance of Bayt al-Maqdis before in history and particularly in Islam. A quick disclaimer as we are starting: when we say Islam, Islam is not just the religion of Muhammad as is thought within Western thinking, starting Islamic history with Prophet Muhammad, but the Quran talks about Islam as the religion of Jesus, the religion of Ibrahim, the religion of the disciples, and the religion of Jacob and Ishaq and Ismail, and all of them are regarded as prophets of Islam. So it's important to see it within this perspective. So when we are talking about the history of Bayt al-Maqdis, and this course will be covering the history of Bayt al-Maqdis, we're not starting with within Islam. We're not starting with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We are taking it back to the starting point. We are discussing it right from the beginning. So we will be giving an overview of the history of this region from the first humans all the way till today. An important concept to talk about is the idea of the intellectual Nakba. We all know that Nakba is regarded as the catastrophe that took place of the occupation of the land of Palestine at the beginning of the 20th century. particularly in 1948. But actually, it goes back to even before that. It goes back to the British occupation in 1917 of this region. And before that, we are talking about the occupation of the mind. The occupation of the mind is actually much worse than the occupation of the land. And when one's mind is occupied, then to be able to free the land, it is not possible. And we've seen this over the last century, that there's been many attempts to liberate this land, the land of Palestine, from first British and then Zionist occupation. And this is still continuing. The first step to do this is the the liberation of the mind, and starting what we call the intellectual revolution regarding this. Most Muslims are, we're talking about 2 billion people around the world, are connected with this land emotionally. However, emotions are, as much as emotions are important, the important fact is we need to focus on actual action and actual knowledge that leads to action. And our motto in the field of Islamic Jerusalem studies is that knowledge drives change. So knowledge is extremely important for driving change and liberation, and then the civilization and creating the civilization in this land. So knowledge drives change, liberation, and civilization. And this is a factor, an important factor in this 10-week course. The field of Islamic Jerusalem studies, and particularly these courses, we have been conducting them with a number of organizations across the world in numerous different languages. This is the first time that this is delivered online in English. There's been a master program and a PhD program based in the UK for Islamic Jerusalem studies, and this has developed also into many Muslim countries, particularly Malaysia, the University of UUM, and Turkey. And Turkey at the moment, 2 universities in Turkey, the University of Mardin Artuklu and the university where I am at the moment, the University Ankara Social Sciences University. This university has the first English program, master's program in the Muslim world in order to create knowledge and scholarship. And the need for this is that, unfortunately, today most of the academic work, most of the writings on Bayt al-Maqdis, on Palestine, on Jerusalem, on Al-Aqsa Mosque is written academically by Zionist and Orientalist scholars. And this has a major effect on the progress of how Bayt al-Maqdis is presented. Also, in terms of Palestine studies, much of the studies are looking at it from a nationalistic point of view, looking at this issue from within the framework of a nation state, within the framework of nation states that were created in the early 20th century. What we are trying to do within this is to try to broaden this work to look at it from a much broader angle, to look at it from the angle that is related to particularly Islam, and to give the Islamic narrative on Bayt al-Maqdis, on Palestine. And you've heard me repeat the word Bayt al-Maqdis a few times. The word Bayt al-Maqdis, we will get into more detail of this as we go along. But the terminology Bayt al-Maqdis is the terminology used by Prophet Muhammad in referring to both Al-Aqsa Mosque, the holy city, and also the holy region or the holy land that surrounds it. So the use of the terminology is extremely important, and the name of this course being step by step to Bayt al-Maqdis, a concise history of Palestine, is what we will be working with. So the starting point is, why is Bayt al-Maqdis important? If we look at it from different concepts, from different angles, we see that nearly half the world's population have an attachment to this land and to this holy city. And this attachment is due to religious significance, religious connections with this land, the religious importance that it carries for Christians, Jews, and to Muslims today. We are looking at the importance in Christianity. This is where Jesus walked and preached and was raised to heaven from. Within the Jewish tradition, this is where this land was the promised land, and they've tried to live within this land after Moses, Prophet Moses, took them out of Egypt. However, they refused to enter this land, and on this there will be some readings. Many Zionists today try to present the idea that Jerusalem is not mentioned in the Quran. Al-Quds is not mentioned in the Quran. But we see that actually in the Torah, particularly the first 5 books of the Torah, Jerusalem is not, there is no mention of it. However, within the Quran, the geography of the Quran is in the Holy Land, in Bayt al-Maqdis. A third of the Quran is stories of prophets, most of whom lived, preached, and dwelled in this land, and were part of this geography. And the Quran taking such an important factor, as Ibn al-Murajjah says, that there is no place mentioned in the Quran as much as Bayt al-Maqdis, because when we look at the stories of the prophets, most of them are directly related to this land, and the Quran is giving even details of this. To Muslims, this is not just the land of the prophets, it's also the land of the first Qibla. This is the Qibla that Prophet Muhammad faced during the Meccan period, and also during the Medina period for a year and a half. So 13 years in Mecca and a year and a half in Medina. 2/3 of the prophethood of Muhammad, his Qibla was facing towards Bayt al-Maqdis, and what this actually means, we will get into the details of it as we go along. The third point, this is the land of the night journey and ascension. Prophet Muhammad went on a journey by night from Mecca. He could have gone directly to the heavens, but no, he first went to Bayt al-Maqdis, to Al-Aqsa Mosque, prayed in it, and we will get into what the concept of a mosque is, or a masjid is. Did it exist before Islam? Did it not? These questions we will look into as we go along. So it is the land of the night journey and ascension. And after the ascension, the Prophet Muhammad comes back to Al-Masjid al-Aqsa and gathers with all the prophets, from Adam all the way to Jesus, peace be upon them, all of them in a prayer, a summit, a unique summit that has not happened anywhere else in the world. It happens inside Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, and 124,000 prophets pray behind Prophet Muhammad, not just in a prayer that is religious, but also it is a political statement of handing the reins of leadership of humanity to the Ummah of Muhammad and to his followers. And this took place inside Al-Masjid al-Aqsa during the night journey. It is also within Islam, there are three particular mosques that every Muslim should set out to visit if one can. And these are Al-Masjid al-Haram in Mecca, Al-Masjid al-Aqsa in Bayt al-Maqdis, and the Mosque of the Prophet in Medina. To Muslims, this region was connected to them right from the beginning of the prophethood of Muhammad, and through prayer, through political connection, through religious, through spiritual. And also, when we move to the Medina period, we see this develop into a culture. There's the culture of Bayt al-Maqdis developing amongst the early companions of Prophet Muhammad. And this then leads to military action to take this land and to bring it under the Islamic rule. The Prophet himself had a strategic plan for Bayt al-Maqdis, and he headed towards Bayt al-Maqdis and tried to liberate it during his lifetime. However, he was not successful, so this was left to his successors, particularly Abu Bakr, who continued on this path and continued preaching and sending the armies towards Bayt al-Maqdis until this was the capitulation of the city happened during the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab. We run from that time all the way to the Crusades. The Muslims created for the first time a multicultural society where Christians, Muslims, and Jews were living side by side. It became a model for the world, and the Muslims, for the first time in history, were able to create such a society where everyone was living side by side in peace and harmony. If we look just before Islam, what took place was when the Persians in 614, and the prophethood of Muhammad started in 610. When the Persians came to this land in 614, what they did is they destroyed the churches, they killed the Christians with the support of the Jews. And when the Byzantines came back, they did the same to everyone who was there. So there was always the ethics of war and the fighting and what used to happen within that period was at the ethics was very, 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 very low. Islam came with very high ethics in regarding to war. That one should not kill a woman, a child, not even cut down trees, and you can see that this actually was quite was quite a change, a revolution in terms of what used to take place within 7th century politics. The Muslims continued with this all the way until the Crusades. With the Crusades, this was the first interruption in the history of Bayt al-Maqdis. What happens is that the Crusaders slaughtered everyone in the city. Within Al-Aqsa Mosque alone, tens of thousands were slaughtered, according to even Crusader sources. And what we see is that even the Jews were burnt in their synagogue, and even Christians were killed during the Crusader times. After Salah ad-Din comes back, and this is quite interesting, what Salah ad-Din does is he brings back what the Muslims have established in the 7th century, and again for many centuries to come, recreating peace and security in the region. Salah ad-Din did not do what the Crusaders did in terms of mass killing all the Christians who were in the city. He allowed the European Christians to return back. He allowed the region's Christians to live within the city in peace and harmony, and allowed the Jews to live back within the region one more time. This continued throughout the Mamluk period for around 250 years. And then we have the Ottoman period. And the Ottoman period, in this sense, was quite important because it continued on the same path, and it allowed, again, Muslims, Christians, and Jews to live side by side in the Holy City. However, the European Crusader mentality from the time of Salah ad-Din never died out. There was many Crusader campaigns to take back this region. You know, you've heard of Richard the Lionheart in the trying to take back the city, and eventually leaving back to England without success after signing the Ramla Treaty. But he made an interesting point that first, before we need to take the Holy Land, we need to first take Egypt. Without Egypt, we cannot keep the Holy Land within our hands. So what he did, is what they did, the Crusaders, is there was every century there was a new attempt for a new crusade. Just alone within the 13th century, there was 35 attempts, crusading campaigns to take this land. This changed with changes in Europe, and particularly with the rise of the Ottomans, and the Ottomans reaching the gates of Vienna in Europe. The Crusader campaigns died out. However, this took a turn within, particularly after Martin Luther, and what we see is that European Christians moved to a new dimension of Protestantism, and this took us into a different angle and started the idea of the need for taking this land, bringing it under European control, however, in a new, different approach. So we have calls for taking the Jews in Europe to Palestine and to Bayt al-Maqdis. One, to get rid of the Jewish problem in Europe, but also at the same time to hasten the return of the Messiah. However, the first official call for the Jews to come to Palestine happened during the time of Napoleon. And Napoleon, as a secular statesman, he was looking at this from a different perspective. And he, in 1798, occupied Egypt. And as he occupied Egypt, he then, in 1799, headed towards Palestine. And on the walls of Acre, in 1799, he made the first call for the Jews around the world to come to Palestine under his banner, and that he will recreate for them a Jewish state under the French, and this will be part of the French Empire. But at the same time, he said he would rebuild for them the temple. The failure of Napoleon and his defeat at the shores of Acre left this project to the British, and many British Christian Zionists, and this is important, that Christian Zionism came well before Jewish Zionism. And Christian Zionists at that time, what they did is they tried to convert the Jews to first to Christianity, and then take them to Palestine. However, the first part failed. So what they did is they concentrated on taking the Jews to Palestine, and they succeeded in a sense in starting this movement of taking the Jews to Palestine. This continued particularly during the time that the British managed to establish the first Western consulate in the city of Al-Quds, in the city of Jerusalem, and they created the consulate in the mid 1800s, in the mid 19th century, and this was the first attempt at penetrating the Holy Land and to bringing it or to having more influence over this area in particular. So what we see is that Christian Zionism comes well before Jewish Zionism, and this is quite important in a sense, that the main driving force for this idea were Christian Zionists, not Jewish Zionists. Actually, the Jews at that time were not that much interested in moving from Europe to the west, to Palestine, and they were actually against this idea. However, this took place with a lot of pressure, with small numbers moving towards Palestine. Then what we see is European powers pushing for this idea further amongst the Jews, until we have Jewish Zionism starting particularly at the end of the 19th century, with the first Zionist Congress in Europe in 1897. So taking a step towards moving the Jews and creating a Jewish national home. We see that the British were very instrumental in this, and they had a lot of influence in this regard, until they actually managed to move large numbers by the end of the Ottoman period. And the British and their occupation of the land in the early 20th century was the main milestone that took place and changed prospects.
Hello again, and welcome back, Dr. Khalid. We will continue now, inshallah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Amna. Our apologies for the technical problems. So as we were saying, that what we get to this point where the Zionists start moving to this land, and the British, with the help of the British, they managed to occupy the land of Bayt al-Maqdis and establish a state in 1948. To many people, the start of the Nakba, as we mentioned, and now what we did is we did a quick overview of the history of Bayt al-Maqdis in the last 2,000 years, and now we will try now to delve into some concepts and some details in some detail. So the Nakba, the starting of the Nakba, of the occupation or the catastrophe in the occupation of the occupation of this land, is related to the occupation in 1948. However, this was only the starting point. As we have mentioned, this took place even before the British occupation, with the occupation of the mine, but the British occupation was quite important in this regard. The British occupation in 1917 was the main changing point for the occupation of the land of Bayt al-Maqdis. The occupation of this land, you can see that the continuation of the crusading legacy is was very strong within that time. What you can see in front of you in the slides that you see in front of you is when the British occupied Palestine in 1917. They said Jerusalem is rescued by the British after 673 years of Muslim rule. And you can see the two images on the right. The Crusader legacy was still continuing. And you can see here a British soldier shaking the hand of a crusader for completing the job. And on the left-hand side, this is from a newspaper in the UK saying the Last Crusade, and Richard the Lionheart stating that his dream has come true. The most dangerous thing now we come to is what we call the intellectual Nakba, the occupation of the mind. When the mind is occupied, it is extremely dangerous because you cannot get out of the occupation of the land if your mind is under occupation. And part of this occupation, the colonialist heritage, is the division of Bilad al-Sham and the Muslim world into mini states. So we can see the British with the ruler together with the French have reshaped the whole region according to this, the idea of the nation state and the idea of creating new identities and new flags and new information. The Nakba was not just one single Nakba, there was numerous Nakbas that took place. We said the first is the occupation of Palestine in 1917. In 1948, we have another Nakba. And in 1967, we have a third. And these Nakbas today continue in Sheikh Jarrah, in Jerusalem, across the whole of Palestine. This has not finished. And these, unfortunately, continue. So in order to get rid of this intellectual Nakba, we need to first take a step and try to end what we call the occupation of the mind, free the mind from occupation. We said also part of the problem is that the attachment to Bayt al-Maqdis is an emotional attachment. People, if you say Al-Aqsa is under occupation and we need to do, people will come out in demonstrations and will get very emotional about what is happening. However, this needs to turn into action, and we need to take this. And this course is taking the first step towards freeing our mind and ending this intellectual Nakba that we are living through, and working together for the liberation of the land, the holy land of Bayt al-Maqdis. We've already made a point that this is important to nearly half the world's population. It's always been a hotbed for conflicts. However, the only time that it has seen peace, as Karen Armstrong, the British historian or historian of religion, has said, that it only has seen peace under the Muslims. The city has had many names, and now we will talk a little bit about the names of this region and what these names are. We already talked about Bayt al-Maqdis. Another name is the name Or Salim or Shalim. And this is an old Arabic name, an old Canaanite name related to the history of this region. Before there was even a Jewish religion, before there was Judaism, this 3,000 years before Christ, this city was already important and holy to the Canaanites. Also, we know that it was named as Yabus and also as Ilya and Al-Quds, and we will talk about this in some extent. The names, when these names were used in an article that I've written in a book called Al-Quds, History and Religion and Politics, edited by Professor Muhyiddin Ataman and Professor Abdul Fattah El-Awaisi. In the first chapter, I argue that the name Bayt al-Maqdis is the earliest name of this city and this region. We have the first record, 19th century BC, of the name as Or Salim, or the city of Salim, or the whole. There is many different explanations, but some say it means city of peace, but this is not accurate. The name Yabus, in reference to the Jebusites who were living in that region, who were an offshoot of the Canaanites, the Arab Canaanites who were living in that region. It's also mentioned in the Torah. Elia, the name Elia was used from the 2nd century after Christ. The name Elia and Elia Capitolina from the time of the Emperor Hadrian. This name became the name of that region. We see that in the 7th century, the Arabs were using the name Elia, but the Prophet was also using the name, Prophet Muhammad was using the name Bayt al-Maqdis. The name Al-Quds was introduced 3 centuries after the start of the prophethood of Muhammad, during the time of the Khalif al-Ma'mun in the 9th century. Al-Quds al-Sharif was used around the time of Salah ad-Din, after the time of Salah ad-Din, and continued to be used during the Ottoman period. We also have East and West Jerusalem, as the British have divided the city into two, and now the Zionists talk about Greater Jerusalem. What these names, how were they used? The name Elia, as you can see in the map in front of you, Elia Capitolina was the city, and the region of Elia extended from Nablus in the north to Hebron in the south. And within this region, Jews were not allowed to enter. This was a decree by the Emperor Hadrian, who said that Jews are not, if a Jew or a circumcised person was to look towards this land, he will be executed. So we see that Elia Capitolina was the city and Elia was the region. When we come to the name Bayt al-Maqdis, the name Bayt al-Maqdis in the tradition of the Prophet was used for Al-Aqsa Mosque, was also used for the walled city, and also was used for the region, or what we call the Holy Land, Al-Ard al-Muqaddasa in the Quran. And you can see that this is the map that you see here in front of you. And this is the extent of this holy region. Also within the Quran, there are two new terminologies introduced. The first is the land of Baraka, the land of blessings, which is much bigger and includes much more, a larger area, most of Bilad al-Sham and parts of Egypt. And the second, and this is mentioned in the Quran in the Meccan period 5 times. Al-Ard allati barakna fiha, the land which we have blessed. And in one verse in Surah Al-Anbiya, chapter 17, chapter 19, verse 71, it mentions that this land is blessed for the whole world, or the worlds. So this blessing is not just for the Muslims, it is for everyone. So here we see that the Muslims had an inclusive vision towards this land. The second is Al-Ard al-Muqaddasa in the Quran, or the Holy Land, which is part of the land of Baraka, which is what we know today as Palestine. This is the region that the Quran mentions as Al-Ard al-Muqaddasa that you see here in the screen in green. If we continue, we see that Al-Ard al-Muqaddasa, or the Holy Land, includes both Al-Aqsa Mosque, includes the Holy City, and includes this wide region. And this is the holy boundaries of this region, and these do not change with time like the administrative boundaries. These are fixed boundaries that have been there for from time immemorial. So we see the terminology Bayt al-Maqdis is used for Al-Aqsa Mosque, is used for the Holy City, and also is used for the wider region we know as the Holy Land. Now, to make this a little bit interactive, we'd like your engagement here, if you allow us. And in the chat section on YouTube, I would ask you to give me an answer. 1, 2, or 3. So you're just typing a number. What is Al-Aqsa Mosque? So what we are presenting here for you in front of you is that number 1 is this golden dome, number 2 is this copper dome, and number 3 is a wider area. So is Al-Aqsa Mosque the building with the golden dome? Is it the building with the copper dome, or is it number 3? So I think people are answering, and they're quite fast in their answer. Amina, can you help me to say what the answers are? I can see Safwan is saying number 1, it is the Dome of the Rock. Sidra is saying it is number 3. There's no number 2s I can't see. I'm looking at YouTube as we are speaking. Judy is saying it is the green dome. So it is. There's no green dome in Al-Aqsa, so it's this copper dome or silver dome. Also, Nadia is agreeing with her. Amina, did I miss anyone or everyone? Most people are saying actually it's...
Yes, mashallah, the responses are very... There are so many responses.
Yes.
Excellent, everyone. I feel like most people answered correctly from what I see.
Yes.
Which is the whole compound.
Yes. So Al-Aqsa is neither the Dome of the Rock. Al-Aqsa is not the Al-Jami' Al-Aqsa, the southern building. Al-Aqsa is everything you see in front of you in this image in color. So it's everything. Al-Aqsa is number 3. It is everything within this compound. So those who said Al-Aqsa is number 1 are actually only 2% correct, because this is only 2% of Al-Aqsa Mosque. Those who said it is number 2, it is the building with the silver or the copper dome, are 3% correct, because this is part of Al-Aqsa Mosque. But these both buildings were built later on by Muslims. So what is Al-Aqsa Mosque? Al-Aqsa Mosque, you can see the minarets of Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is from a north view. You can see the minarets are on the side, on the western side and on the northern side, and this sets where Al-Aqsa Mosque is. So Al-Aqsa Mosque is the Dome of the Rock and Al-Jami' Al-Aqsa with the silver dome and everything that you can see within these 4 walls. So we're talking about hundreds of monuments. During the night journey when Prophet Muhammad came, what was there? These buildings were not there, but a masjid was there. And for us to have a masjid, now we will get into a discussion what a masjid is. You can see these walls existed before Muhammad was even born. And not just before Muhammad was born, before Jesus was born. According to archaeology, these walls actually existed before Christ, BC. So everything that you see here within this compound, hundreds of monuments and spaces, like, for example, this building here that you can see. This is the Dome of the Chain. The Dome of the Chain sits right in the center of Al-Aqsa Mosque, this small building next to the Dome of the Rock. This is the Dome of the Chain. It sits right in the center of Al-Aqsa Mosque. Looking at what is within Al-Aqsa Mosque, you can see these buildings. This is the Dome of the Spirits. This is the Dome of Ascension. This is the Dome of the Prophet. This is the Dome of the Chain, and in the middle here is the massive structure of the Dome of the Rock. What is the Dome of the Rock? The Dome of the Rock was built around a rock, and hence the name. The dome over the rock. So you have this rock, and the dome was built over it. So let's keep this interactive, as the answers before were mostly correct. What is the significance of this rock? If you would write, why is this rock significant? And then we will come back to the significance of it. The other building to the south of the Dome of the Rock is Al-Jami' al-Aqsa, with the copper dome. Sometimes it was silver, but currently this is what it looks like. In some images, they've colored it as green, but there is no green domes in the inside the Masjid al-Aqsa. And this is the place where the Imam stands. This is where the minbar is. This is where he gives the sermon for the whole area of Al-Aqsa Mosque. So the Imam would stand in front, and people in their thousands and their tens of thousands pray behind the Imam. But you can see that this is a whole area. This wall here is called the Burak Wall, as one of you have written, and you can see the Prophet entered Al-Aqsa Mosque during the night journey after he tied the Burak to this wall, and then he entered into this building. Yes, as Sumaya says, this the rock's significance underneath this golden dome is because the Prophet Muhammad during the night journey, as also Riyaz is saying, this is where the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven from. But actually, there is the Dome of Ascension, and the rock actually extends all the way to the Dome of Ascension. So it's not just where the Dome of the Rock is. The rock actually extends underneath the masjid. And the masjid is quite large. The masjid is the biggest mosque in the world until the 20th century. And if you look at Muslim geographers in their writings, in their books, they're talking about Al-Aqsa as the biggest mosque in the world. The second was the Mosque of Cordoba in Andalusia. However, in the 20th century, there was expansion of the Masjid al-Haram, the Kaaba in Mecca, and this is now the biggest in terms of size. Al-Aqsa is 142,000 square meters. 140,000 square meters. You know how big that is? That's the size of 35 football fields. Not a small area. This is a very, very large area, and it can accommodate hundreds of thousands of worshippers at one time. Now, what we will try to cover in the rest of this course, not today, but today is the starting point, is a history of Bayt al-Maqdis from the earliest humans all the way to the modern period. And what you see here in front of you is a timeline of the rulers that have been in the area of Bayt al-Maqdis. You can see here that the earliest were the Natufians in the region of Bayt al-Maqdis in the Holy Land. We're talking 12,000 BC, followed by the Canaanites, followed by the numerous different dynasties and rulers. However, before this, we will talk about the connection with the first human, with Prophet Adam and this land in particular. So now, talking about the importance this land carries to Islam and to Muslims and to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This land, as we have already mentioned, was the first qibla of the Prophet. What does it mean that it was his first qibla? When did the Prophet start to pray? The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is a very important concept, as we have started with, the concept of Islam, the concept of the idea of Islam did not start with Muhammad. Muhammad was only the final prophet, the seal of the prophets that have come before him. So Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not the first prophet of Islam. He was the last prophet of Islam. And the prophets before him used to pray, used to fast, used to also make pilgrimage, also used to give zakah. So everything that Islam teaches was actually, that Muhammad taught, was already the religion of the prophets that came before him. So this is quite an important concept. And the Quran
emphasizes this many times. The Quran talks about the fasting is an obligation on you, like it was prescribed for those who became before you. We know that Hajj, at the time of Ibrahim, there was Hajj already in place. The idea of zakah, when Jesus was born, he said, وَأَوْصَانِي بِالصَّلَاةِ وَالزَّكَاةِ, and God commanded me to pray and to give zakah as long as I live. So what we see within this context is that salah, prayer, existed before the time of Prophet Muhammad. And the early prayers of Prophet Muhammad before the night journey, we know that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam prayer, the 5 daily prayers, took place during the night journey. But for 10 years before that, the Prophet was already praying. Do we have evidence for this? Yes, we have evidence from many of the traditions of the Prophet that he used to pray in the morning and in the evening. And the Quran, the second chapter of the Quran, after the chapter of Al-Alaq, after Iqra, after the command to read, the second command was to pray. Ya ayyuhal muzammil, ya ayyuhal muddathir, stand up and pray. Ya ayyuhal muzammil, qumil layla illa qalila. Stand and pray all of the night except for a small portion. So the Prophet used to pray the night prayer, which was an obligation for Muslims at that time. He used to pray, and his qibla used to be towards Bayt al-Maqdis. How do we know that his qibla was towards Bayt al-Maqdis? Because it was the qibla of the prophets that came before him. And we have a tradition of this from Ibn Abbas in Musnad Ahmad, a Sahih tradition that the Prophet, during the Meccan period, his qibla was towards Bayt al-Maqdis. What this creates for us is something very interesting. It creates a very strong spiritual bond between you and your qibla. Like Muslims today are connected with the Kaaba. And if you think, if you haven't seen the Kaaba, and if I ask you, would you like to go and visit the Kaaba? Your answer would be yes. Why would you want to go and visit the Kaaba? You will give me so many reasons, but the most important reason is that you are facing, it's a spiritual hub, as Imam al-Razi puts it. You stand up every day, 5 times a day, facing towards the Kaaba. So it creates a spiritual bond between you and this place. And this is what happened to the early Muslims. Al-Arqam, Ibn Abi al-Arqam, whom the Prophet used to meet in his house with the early Muslims, he used to, after the Islam of Umar, he comes to the Prophet and he says, Ya Rasulullah, I would like to go to Bayt al-Maqdis. The Prophet said, are you going there for business? Because people, merchants from Mecca go there for business. He said, no, I would like to go and pray in it. So for him, this spiritual connection was very important. And we need to try to revive the spiritual connection between the Muslims and Al-Aqsa Mosque. This needs to be done on a daily basis. How can we revive this? We cannot change the Qibla today and say the Qibla will be towards Al-Aqsa. The Quran establishes that the Qibla is Al-Kaaba and will continue towards the Kaaba, as we see in Surah Al-Baqarah. But what is important here is that we need to think of a way that we can connect ourselves and connect our minds and our souls to this place on a daily basis. And maybe at the end, if there are questions, we can discuss how can we spiritually connect ourselves to Bayt al-Maqdis on a daily basis. So this is number one. The Qibla, the early Muslims also built their first mosques towards Al-Aqsa. Even before the migration of the Prophet Muhammad to Medina, the Mosque of Quba was established with its Qibla towards Al-Aqsa. Not only the Mosque of Quba, but also all the mosques built by the Prophet in Medina in the early years in Medina, particularly in the first year. The Mosque of the Prophet, many other mosques like the Mosque of Bani Salama, the Mosque of the Two Qiblas, all of them were built facing towards Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. And then after the Qibla changed, all these mosques, instead of facing north, west, they started facing south and southeast. So we can see that until the Qibla changed, the Qibla of the Muslims was this rock, the rock inside the Masjid al-Aqsa. And this rock, by the way, in length is bigger than the Kaaba. The Kaaba today is 12 meters long. This rock is 18 meters long. So we're not talking about a small thing. We're talking about a very large matter. The second point that I would like to discuss is that Al-Aqsa is the second mosque on earth. And this is extremely important. What do we mean by the second mosque on earth? This is established within the hadith of the Prophet. But first, in order to understand what the second mosque actually means, we need to go first to what is the first mosque. What is the first mosque on earth? We know this from the Quran, from chapter Al Imran, verse 96. It says the first house of worship built for humanity or set up for humanity was the one in Mecca, the one in Mecca. So it establishes that the first building on earth was actually the building of the Kaaba in Mecca. And even when Ibrahim came, Prophet Ibrahim, he came and he rebuilt the Kaaba. He did not establish it from zero. He rebuilt it. And the Quran says, وَإِذْ يَرْفَعُ إِبْرَاهِيمَ الْقَوَاعِدَ مِنَ الْبَيْتِ, when Ibrahim was raising the foundations of the house. And another verse, which is quite interesting, it says, when Ibrahim left his son and his wife, Hajar and Ismail, and Ismail was still an infant, he made a prayer to God that he left them next to Allah's sacred house. And then another verse says that Allah showed him where this house was, and then Ibrahim rebuilt it. If I ask you, what is the shape of the Kaaba today? Most Muslims would tell me that the shape of the Kaaba today is square. But is it really a square? This is an important question. If we look from this aerial image, that we see that each wall in the Kaaba has a different dimension. It's not really a square, and it's not even a cube. The Kaaba actually has a different shape. And if we look here at the plan of the Kaaba, you can see it here. One wall is 13 meters, one is 11, one is 11.2, and one is 10 and 9. So each wall in the Kaaba has a different dimension. But the question is, was the Kaaba always like this? Or was it different? And when we look at what the Kaaba looks like today, the Kaaba used to be much longer. You all know the story when the Prophet, before his prophethood, when he was 35 years old, the people of Mecca rebuilt the Kaaba, and the idea of who will place the black stone in its place, and there was a big issue, and eventually the Prophet Muhammad resolved the matter. But the people of Mecca took out 4 or 5 meters of the Kaaba because they could not find sufficient halal money to build it. So the Kaaba used to be much longer than it is today, and it used to extend to cover about half of what we know as Hijr Ismail or Al-Hatim, as you see here in front of you. So the Kaaba used to extend to around, instead of 12 and 13 meters, it used to be 17 and 18 meters long. This was the length. And this, if Allah grants you a visit to the Kaaba, if you visit Mecca, you cannot make tawaf from inside this area, because this used to be part of the Kaaba. You have to make tawaf around the whole of the area for you to be able to reach and continue your tawaf. But you can enter into this area and you can pray in it. And there's a Sahih hadith of the Prophet when our mother Aisha asked the Prophet that she wanted to pray inside the Kaaba. He said, pray here, it will count as if you are praying inside the Kaaba. So the shape of the Kaaba before the time of Prophet Muhammad used to be a little bit more like a rectangle. And when it was built by Ibrahim, this is established in the books of Imam al-Azraqi and Imam al-Fakihi on their histories of Mecca. We see that the Kaaba had no roof, and the Kaaba had 2 doors. People will enter from one and exit from the other. Coming back to the second mosque on earth. So the first mosque, we know what is the Kaaba. And we know that the Kaaba existed right from the beginning of humanity. It existed before Ibrahim, and Ibrahim just rebuilt the Kaaba like it was rebuilt many times in history. We come back to Al-Aqsa Mosque, and we already established that the walls of Al-Aqsa Mosque existed before the time of Prophet Muhammad, and the Quran acknowledges this place as a mosque before even the prophethood of Muhammad, and it makes up a sixth of the old city. So, as we have said, 142,000 square meters is the size of Al-Aqsa Mosque. 142 dunum. Some sources say 144, but the exact calculation is 142,000 square meters. If we look at the walls of Al-Aqsa, are they equal? Does each wall have the same dimension? Are they perpendicular? When we look at this, actually it's not. And it looks like a rectangle, but it's not a full rectangle because each wall in Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa has a different dimension. The southern wall, 281, 314 for the northern wall. The western wall is 488, and the eastern wall, 466. This is quite a strange shape. Why is Al-Aqsa built in this form? Many of you may ask. But to have an answer is if we look at the Kaaba, which is much smaller, and Al-Aqsa, we see that there is some similarities between both of them. And if we take this a step further, and this is the work of Dr. Haytham Ar-Ratrouf, who did his PhD at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow in the UK, and his work is incredible and his book, you can find it online, The Architectural Development of Al-Aqsa Mosque in Islamic Jerusalem in the Early Muslim Period, published in 2004. You can find it on the e-library of ISRA, ISRA Waqf with a v.org/e-library. You will find the book there, and you can learn more about Al-Aqsa Mosque in the early period, and even before the Muslim conquest, what was there at Al-Aqsa Mosque. This image actually here that you see in front of you is quite interesting. It shows you that Al-Aqsa Mosque is built over a mountain. So it's not a flat land, it's quite interesting. And the highest point is the rock, and this is where Al-Jami' Al-Aqsa is in the southern part. But there is more than 30 meters difference in height between the top of the rock and where the mihrab of Maryam is in this southern eastern area of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. But coming now to the similarities between Al-Aqsa and the Kaaba, you can see that, to repeat again, that the Kaaba is much smaller in size. It is the longest wall is around 18 meters, but Al-Aqsa is over nearly about half a kilometer, around 500 meters, one wall. So we're looking at the proportions and the similarities between them. And if we compare between both of these, what we find is that they fit not exactly perfectly over one another. The shape of the Kaaba and the shape of Al-Aqsa, not only this, but also the angles. Here it is 85 degrees, here it's 85 degrees, there it's 92 on this side, exactly fitting one another. And this actually makes us think that it cannot be a coincidence for it to fit perfectly and to fit in this, the angles fitting perfectly and the proportions of one another. This takes us to another interesting fact, that the foundations of Al-Aqsa Mosque, built before Christ, are facing naturally towards the Kaaba in Mecca. And this is quite interesting because, according to archaeologists, the foundations of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa date back to the Roman and to the Greek period. But neither the Romans nor the Greek had any significance to the Kaaba. But this is a very large area that they have built on what was already in existence there, and to show that this was always a mosque. Al-Aqsa was always a mosque, even before the time of Prophet Muhammad, and even before the time of Prophet Jesus. This was always a masjid. And this also adds to the equation that the Jews claim that this was the site of a temple, a Jewish temple. To Jews, Mecca has no significance whatsoever. Why, if this was the site of a temple, why was it built facing towards the Kaaba? Then this shows again that this was always a masjid from the beginning of time. This brings us to another interactive question, and let's see if you are able to engage with us. How long was between the building of the Kaaba and Al-Aqsa, the initial building? I will give you three answers. 4,000 years between the Kaaba and Al-Aqsa, number one. If you write just the numbers, is enough. Number two, it's 400 years. And number three, it is 40 years. So we have three options. I would very much appreciate if you write 1, 2, or 3 in the answers. Number one is that it's 4,000. Number two, it's 400. Number three is 40 years. Amina, can you help me again with the answers? I can see most of the answers are
number 3, yes.
number 3 again.
MashaAllah.
Yes. So some people saying 400, but the majority are saying actually number 3. And this, how do we know that the difference between the building is 40 years? Is from an authentic narration of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, narrated in Bukhari and also in Muslim, that the Abu Dhar asked the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "What is the first mosque on earth? Ayu masjidin wudi'a fil ardi awwal?" The Prophet answered, "Al-Masjid al-Haram, the Kaaba." Then he asked, "Then what is the second mosque built on earth?" He said, Al-Aqsa Mosque, Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. He said, "How long was between both of them?" The Prophet answered, 40 years. So actually this fits in with the narrative that we just presented in terms of scientific understanding, that between the similarities show us that the builder is one, or at least would have copied one from the other. The angles are fitting perfectly. The direction of Al-Aqsa towards the Kaaba also shows that the Al-Aqsa came after the Kaaba. For it to be built towards the Kaaba existed before that. So we know that from many narrations that the building of Al-Aqsa Mosque, this hadith that we've just mentioned, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, in explaining this hadith, he says this is in reference to the first building of the time of Prophet Adam. Both Al-Masjid al-Haram and Al-Masjid al-Aqsa were built during the time of Adam, and then were rebuilt by many prophets who came after them during different centuries. We know that Ibrahim alayhi salam rebuilt the Kaaba with his son Ismail, and we have some Muslim accounts that he rebuilt Al-Aqsa with his son Ishaq. And we know that many prophets who came after have rebuilt Al-Masjid al-Aqsa all the way until the arrival of Umar ibn Khattab, who rebuilt this masjid. So it's important to understand this idea of the concept of a masjid is not a concept that started with Prophet Muhammad. The concept of masjid existed well before the time of Prophet Muhammad, and it starts with the first human on earth. And for us to have a masjid, it does not need to have a dome and a minaret. These were developed in the later Muslim period, during the Umayyad times. During the time of the Prophet, what was there in the Kaaba, in the Mosque of the Prophet in Medina, was 4 walls built towards. So what we need for a masjid is you need to have the space, the direction, the Qibla, and the boundaries. And this existed in Al-Masjid al-Haram in Mecca, existed in Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, existed in the mosques of Medina that were built by the Prophet Muhammad. And we also know that many prophets came to this land. We already mentioned at the beginning that most of the prophets mentioned in the Quran, 25 prophets are mentioned by name in the Quran. Most of them have a direct relation to the land of Bayt al-Maqdis. We know that Prophet Ibrahim, as the Quran says, that God saved him and his and Lut to the land which Allah has blessed for all the nations in Surah Al-Anbiya, verses 71. We know that Ismail, Ishaq, Yaqub, Yusuf were born in this land and lived. Ismail was taken as a child to Mecca, and Ishaq, Yaqub, and Yusuf lived in this land. We know that before the time of Prophet Muhammad, there was 3 prophets at one time: Zakaria, Yahya, and Isa, and all of them were in the land of Bayt al-Maqdis and inside al-Masjid al-Aqsa. They used to pray, and even the Quran talks about the mihrab of Maryam, the chamber of her mihrab, and the chamber of the chamber of Zakaria, where the glad tiding of his son Yahya came to him, and in the mihrab of Maryam, the glad tiding of her son Isa came. And the Quran is talking about specific sites within this place, in an easterly place, Makanan Sharqiyya, and then it says in a distant place. When she became pregnant, she walked away from the mosque, and then she gave birth next to the palm tree. And the Quran gives a lot more about what is happening. The third point, that Al-Masjid al-Aqsa is not the third holiest site in Islam, and this is very important. Many Zionists repeat this, that to Muslims, Al-Aqsa is the third holiest place. To us, it is number 1. Actually, we just shown that Al-Masjid al-Aqsa is number 1 for the Muslims. It is their first qibla. It is also, Al-Masjid al-Aqsa is also number 2. It is the second mosque on earth. And we also know that Al-Masjid al-Aqsa is one of 3 holy places that Muslims need to go and pray in. And we know this from a hadith of the Prophet, where he mentions, I'm sorry, I went through the slides quickly just to repeat this point. Al-Masjid al-Aqsa is number 1 for Muslims today because it was their first qibla. It is number 2 because it's the second mosque built on earth from the time of Adam. So one of 2 centers of monotheism on earth. And it is one of 3 holy sites Muslims need to set out and visit. And within this, we have many hadith that are mentioned in the books of hadith, like the hadith that Abu Sa'id al-Khudri narrates, that the Prophet ﷺ said, "And do not set out for a journey except to 3 mosques: Al-Masjid al-Haram in Mecca, Al-Masjid al-Aqsa in Bayt al-Maqdis, and my mosque in Medina." So these are the 3 mosques that Muslims need to. In some narrations, it brings back, and the order is different, but here a prayer in Al-Aqsa is multiplied hundreds and thousands of times according to different narrations. Also, the Prophet recommended to the Sahaba to visit Al-Masjid al-Aqsa and to even start their Hajj and Umrah from there. And the reward for going to Al-Masjid al-Aqsa and start your Hajj and Umrah, one is redeemed of all his sins, or is guaranteed paradise, guaranteed Jannah. Another narration, whoever goes to Al-Masjid al-Aqsa just for the sake of praying in it will leave as the day his mother gave birth to him, with no sins. So this only happens in 2 places, in Mecca during Hajj, and in Al-Aqsa if you go with the intention of praying inside Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. The reward is multiplied hundreds, and sometimes 500, sometimes 1,000. Sometimes in one hadith, the Prophet says that the place where you can see Bayt al-Maqdis from, the place where you can see it from, is better than the whole world and what is within it. So even going beyond the reward of prayer, just where you can see Al-Aqsa from, the reward for that is multiplied. The final topic that we will talk about today, and then we'll open it for questions, is the situation Al-Aqsa Mosque is in today since the occupation. As we said at the beginning, Al-Masjid al-Aqsa has been under occupation for many decades, and the situation actually is awful. And I will come to a comparison in a little while, but you can see this at one of the gates of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 soldiers trying to arrest one single Muslim woman at the gates of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. This was not always the case. Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, this is a picture from the end of the Ottoman period. And you can see here the soldiers before going to war would come and ask Allah in Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa for victory from Allah and a close conquest, a close fatah. You can see it in the verse that is written above these soldiers. This picture is from 1331 in the Hijri calendar, and today we are in 1443. So this picture is nearly 110 years ago. This picture of the Muslims inside Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa before it was brought under occupation. So 111, 112 years ago, you can see that it was in the hands of the Muslims. However, in 1917, the British occupied this land, and you can see here the British officers and soldiers coming in and occupying the city. And this is General Allenby, who occupied the city in 1917, and here giving the proclamation in front of his soldiers and the people in the city. From that day on, Palestine started to be reduced. Palestine, what you see here in green is what the British made the borders of Palestine to be. This was not the borders of Palestine during the Ottoman period, but this is British Palestine. This is how they set it out, and you can see that in 1917 it was mostly in the hands of Muslims and Christians, Palestinians, and except for some areas who were under Jewish control. In 1948, Israel occupied with their army 78% of Palestine, of British Palestine, expelled 750,000 people out of their lands. In 1967, Israel occupied the rest of Palestine. Also, they took Sinai, they took the Golan, they took many parts of the surrounding area. And according to the Oslo Accords, this is what they are willing to give back to part of the Palestinians, these little places that you can see, cantons, that Gaza on the here, and parts of the West Bank. And this is still a contended issue, and Israel has, according to international law, has no right to be in the West Bank, in Al-Aqsa Mosque, and in Eastern Jerusalem, and in the Gaza Strip. However, Trump's plan envisages a future Palestinian state to be something like this, divided and giving more of the land of Palestine to the Zionists. In 1948, we showed you here in this image what was lost. 78% of Palestine, Israel took by force, killing, injuring, and forcing, ethnically cleansing Palestinians and forcing them out of their land. The danger Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa faces, the first is the occupation. The occupation is the biggest danger to Al-Aqsa Mosque. And what you see in this picture is in 1967, how the Israeli forces entered Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa with their tanks and entered Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa and desecrated it and raised the Zionist flag over the dome of the rock and over the area of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa and occupied it. And you can see here the general who entered, and immediately they said between quotation marks, the Temple Mount is in our hands, and immediately they took Al-Burak Wall. Al-Burak Wall, according to international law, according to the 1931 report that was done during the British occupation, that was agreed by the League of Nations. Al-Burak Wall, the western wall of Al-Aqsa, is solely for Muslims, and it is a Muslim waqf. Jews have no right whatsoever at this wall, and the Muslims have allowed them to pray close to this wall, but then they wanted the whole wall. So this started the Burak Intifada uprising in the 1920s, late 1920s, and then this was investigated, and the commission came to the report, and this was agreed by the then United Nations, League of Nations, saying that the Al-Burak Wall, the western wall of Al-Aqsa Mosque, is solely Muslim waqf, and everything in front of it. You can see all these beautiful houses and madrasas. All of them were destroyed immediately when Israel took Bayt al-Maqdis in 1967. All of them were destroyed in the first week. People were displaced from their houses. None of these houses exist today, unfortunately, and Israel wants to even take more from this. In 1969, a Christian Zionist, we started talking about Christian Zionism, came before Jewish Zionism. Christian Zionist came to the area of Al-Aqsa Mosque, and with the help of Jewish Zionists, he tried to burn Al-Masjid al-Aqsa and burn the member of Nuruddin and Salah ad-Din, and also caused much damage to the whole of the area. And every single day from 1967, Zionist soldiers enter into Al-Masjid al-Aqsa and with their guns and attack the Muslims whenever there is incidents. But you can see here clearly what happens inside Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. Underneath Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, there are many tunnels dug by the Zionists in order to find some remains of what they call their temple. Until today, this is according to Jewish archaeologists, Israeli archaeologists, they've not been able to find a single remnant of what they call their temple. There is nothing. But they continue to weaken the foundations of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, and Sheikh Ra'ad Salah, who is currently in prison in Palestine, has gone and exposed many of these tunnels and what they are doing to the foundations of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. In the year 2000, Ariel Sharon entered Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, and this caused the first intifada. After the first intifada in 1987, the second intifada, the Palestinians. This is killing and maiming Muslims within Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. And if this would happen anywhere else in the world, how would the world react to this? This is happening in the holiest place of the Muslims, and this, unfortunately, is tolerated by both the international community, and unfortunately, Muslims are silent on this and not taking any real action towards liberating this. According to international law, the Eastern Jerusalem is under occupation, and Israel has no right whatsoever to make any changes within this area. This is a more recent picture with the Zionists in 2017 closing Al-Masjid al-Aqsa for 2 weeks for the Muslims, placing these metal detectors at the gate of the mosque and forcing the Muslims to go through them. The Muslims refused, and eventually Israel was forced to remove these gates and the cameras as people continued to pray outside them, not accepting Israel's sovereignty over Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, which was closed, as I mentioned, for 2 weeks. We come to the last chapter with Donald Trump announcing that Jerusalem, United Jerusalem, not East Jerusalem or West Jerusalem, but United Jerusalem is the eternal capital of not the state of Israel only, but for the Jewish people. And this is a slam on the face of the 2 billion Muslims around the world, and also the 2 billion Christians who believe that this is a holy city for them. And Donald Trump announcing that this is the eternal capital of the Jewish people, and then moving his embassy towards in Eastern Jerusalem, something that all American presidents have said they will do, but none of them have done it. Donald Trump did this move and moved it to that area. There are every single day attacks on Muslims in Al-Aqsa Mosque, their holiest place. And you can see here this Zionist soldier attacking this elderly group of Muslim women. You can see the rage on his face, attacking, and you can see the fear in their faces coming to their holiest place to pray. And they are not allowed, rather, they are being attacked. This Muslim woman, her headscarf was taken off inside at the gate of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, while Muslims are being banned from entering their mosque, and they are being stopped from entering their mosque. Zionists and Jewish extremists are allowed to enter inside Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. And you have heard recently a Jewish court has allowed for prayer within Al-Masjid al-Aqsa for Jews. And this is actually part of what Donald Trump's deal of the century, that Al-Aqsa needs to be open to all the followers, to everyone who wants to come and pray in it. And you can see this happens on a daily. There is not a single day where there is not an incursion by Zionist soldiers and Jewish fanatics and tourists inside Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, while the Muslims are standing unable to enter their mosque. These are images from inside Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, and you can see the amount of ammunition that was used in one incursion by Zionist soldiers inside Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. This is the holiest place for the Muslims, and they are using sometimes live ammunition, as happened in the massacre of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa in the 90s. In here, you can see stun grenades, gas bombs, and rubber bullets being used against the Muslims. This is not acceptable in any way, that people are not safe in their holy place. Al-Aqsa is the focus of the future problem, and I would like to end here that the future plans for Zionists, Christian and Jewish Zionists, is that in the site of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, a Jewish temple needs to be built. A Jewish temple needs to be built on the site of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. Al-Aqsa is thus needs to be destroyed, and in its place, a Jewish temple needs to be built. If the world and Muslims do not take action to stop this, this unfortunately could happen. This is a starting point for us to wake up. If I would tell you the same is happening in Mecca, imagine just for a second, hypothetically speaking, God forbid, that the Kaaba is under American occupation. And for you to go to the Kaaba, you need to first pass by an American checkpoint. The gates, all the gates of Al-Masjid al-Haram are controlled by American non-Muslim soldiers. And you enter, as you are making tawaf, American soldiers are firing at the people who are praying and making tawaf. How would that make you feel as a Muslim? It would make you outraged. There is no difference between what is happening at Al-Aqsa and with this hypothetical scenario. And we need to take action. The first is by gaining knowledge, knowing what the importance of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa is, for us to be able to liberate Al-Masjid al-Aqsa and to bring it back under Muslim control. Thank you very much for listening so attentively, and thank you so much for your engagement. In the next weeks, we will discuss the history of Bayt al-Maqdis, starting from the earliest humans in terms of, and we will do two parallel lines of history. One, we are looking at it from from a religious and Islamic narrative. And the second will be the scientific historical narrative that we have on the history of humanity in general and that of the Muslims in Bayt al-Maqdis. I hope you will find this beneficial, and over the next 9 classes, we will develop the discussion further, inshallah. I think there are some questions, Amna.
Yes. Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Khalid. Jazakallahu khairan. And now we'll start with the very first questions by order, inshallah. So the first question we received was, when did Christian Zionism exist before Jewish Zionism? So I think you're asking which one existed before the other.
Yes. We know that Christian Zionism came well before Jewish Zionism. Jewish Zionism, with the first Congress, actually it existed before the first Zionist Congress in Basel in 1897, but not much before. But Christian Zionism was way before that. And at least for 100 years, the Christian Zionists existed before Jewish Zionists. And the main premise of their thought is that we need to take the Jews to Palestine, not because they like the Jews. Actually, most of the Christian Zionists were actually anti-Semitic, even in the UK. They were promoting taking the Jews to Palestine to get rid of the Jewish problem in Europe, but also to prepare for the return of Jesus Christ. So taking the Jews to Palestine, converting them to Christianity was one mission at one stage, but it failed. Taking them to Palestine, establishing a state for them, and now we come to even acknowledging East Jerusalem as their capital, the whole of Jerusalem, and Jesus still hasn't come back. So for Jesus to return back, Al-Aqsa is now the focus. We need to destroy Al-Masjid al-Aqsa and build on its site a temple so Jesus would return. So this is the context of both of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Khalid. The second question was, who was Salah ad-Din? Was he an Abbasi Khalifa?
Okay, Salah ad-Din, we will talk about him in 4 or 5 weeks. Salah ad-Din was a Kurdish ruler who of a Muslim ruler of Kurdish descent. He was working under Nuruddin Zinki, who was a Turkman, a Turkish ruler, and their main goal was to liberate Bayt al-Maqdis from the Crusaders. And Salah ad-Din was the one that liberated it and brought it back to the Muslim rule. We will expand more on who Salah ad-Din is and what he has done in later classes, inshallah.
Inshallah. Yeah, so the next question is from Irma. So she was saying, it was mentioned that the calling Bayt al-Maqdis is an act of the following of the Sunnah. But while you were talking, you mentioned it was Palestine. Is there any particular reason for calling it Palestine?
Okay, the name Palestine was first used in relation to a tribe that moved from Crete in the Mediterranean to the coast of Bayt al-Maqdis, the coastal area, and they were the Philistines. And then in the Roman period, there was 3 Palestines: Palestine the first, Prima, Secunda, and Treta. There was 3 Palestines divided in that area, and also the region of Elia. However, during the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he never used the term Palestine or Al-Quds. The Prophet always used the name Bayt al-Maqdis. So part of what the sister is asking, part of it is for us to return back to the Islamic framework. Using the name Bayt al-Maqdis is very important. So Bayt al-Maqdis here is in reference to Al-Aqsa, the holy city, and the Holy Land. So we have part of the intellectual Nakba is that we are not using our own terminologies. We are using Palestine as it was set by the British in the early 1900s. This is an important point. Part of reviving the Sunnah, the tradition of the Prophet, and part of reviving the link between Muslims and this land, using the name Bayt al-Maqdis to refer to Palestine would be a very good point. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Khalid. There is another question about the Dome of the Rock. Was it constructed in the time of Abdul Malik bin Marwan? And what's the history of it?
Yes, very good question. Also, today's class is like a trailer. I know the trailers are normally short, but we've gone on for an hour and a half. But this is an introduction to what we will be discussing in the coming weeks, inshallah. So, the Dome of the Rock was built over the rock that has already significance to Muslims. So the rock, as I've already mentioned, was the first qibla of the Muslims and also the qibla of prophets who came before Muhammad, like Isa and Zakaria and Yahya and Musa and Maryam and Sulaiman and Dawood. Their qibla was towards Bayt al-Maqdis. So the rock has this significance. Also, it was the place where the Prophet ascended to heaven. But the building of this building took place during the Umayyad period, about 50 years after the death of the Prophet. Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, the fifth Umayyad Khalif, built the Dome of the Rock to commemorate the Islamic importance of this significant rock, and that's why he constructed the Dome of the Rock. And this changed the skyline of the city. Today, whenever you see an image of Bayt al-Maqdis, of Jerusalem, of Al-Quds, always, even Jews and Zionists, when they want to talk about it, even in their tourist campaigns, they are always presenting the Dome of the Rock because it presents the identity of the city. It has created the identity of the city, and it's an amazing, magnificent structure that we have from the Umayyad period, and actually the first building built by Muslims in the 7th century that continued to this day intact. So it's a single building from nearly 1400 years ago. The building is still in the same shape that it was built. Thank you, Amna.
Jazakallah khair for answering that question. There is a question about someone said they read about Prophet Adam alayhi salam built the Kaaba. It was destroyed during the Great Flood during Prophet Nuh's time. Is that correct?
These are narrations that exist in the Muslim literature, that the building took place during the time of Prophet Adam, and when the flood took place, much or even the Kaaba was destroyed, and was Al-Aqsa, and it was rebuilt by prophets after that.
Okay. There are two questions in a similar context. If these lands are sacred to them, why shouldn't they pray in Al-Aqsa mosques? What exactly is the problem with allowing Jews to pray at Al-Aqsa?
Al-Aqsa Mosque is a masjid. And if you recall in history, when Umar ibn Khattab came and liberated Bayt al-Maqdis and made the Fath of Bayt al-Maqdis in the 7th century, Sophronius, the Christian patriarch, offered Umar to pray inside the church. Umar refused. The reason why Umar refused to pray inside the holiest site for Christianity is that the Muslims later on would come and say, this is where Umar prayed, we also want to pray here, and turn it into a masjid. So Umar was looking, he was far-sighted, he wanted to make sure that Islam protects the holy places of others. When the Muslims came, when Umar ibn Khattab came, Al-Aqsa was deserted for many centuries. There was nothing in Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Muslims did not take Al-Aqsa from anyone. Al-Aqsa was placed even outside the walls of the city, but it was important to Muslims. So the Muslims built Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa on the original foundations that existed even before that. So Umar rebuilt it. The issue is that this is a masjid, and sharing places of worship is very, very problematic. For this reason, even after the Crusaders came and turned Al-Aqsa Mosque into a church, Salah ad-Din did not turn the churches to mosques. He left the churches as they are, but he returned Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa back to a mosque. And from the Ayyubid period, non-Muslims were not allowed to enter into Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. and the introduction of the term haram. This is a place non-Muslims are not allowed to enter, because this is a holy place for Muslims. And for this reason, it's not shared. This is the city. Muslims acknowledge the importance of the city to Christians and Jews, but the area of the mosque is solely for Muslims and would remain in Muslim hands.
Thank you. There is another question is, can we call the Crusaders as Zionists?
No, the concept of Zionism did not exist at that time. I'll try to be short in the answers because we will come and discuss many of these points later on. So I'll try to keep them short to take as many questions as possible.
Okay. Who are the leaders of these Christian Zionists?
Okay, so for example, in the 19th century, we have the British, many societies were set up in London for promoting Christianity amongst the Jews. This was, as I mentioned, the first step. And then for taking the Jews to Palestine. And many British politicians were actually part of this. For example, Lord Palmerston, who was then the foreign minister, and then he became the prime minister of England. He was promoting this idea in terms of British interest. So the British needed to have a state there that will control the region on behalf of the British. But his son-in-law, Lord Shaftesbury, he was a Christian Zionist and he evangelical Christian, and pushing this idea forward that the Jews need to be. He was actually against allowing Jews to vote in the British elections, and at the same time promoting that Jews need to be taken back to Palestine. So this is some of the leaders in the past, but we see many Zionist leaders, Christian Zionist leaders today in the United States. They have many TV channels, they have many campaigns, even for the rebuilding of the Third Temple. You can look through their websites and sometimes watch their TV channels. They're nearly on every satellite dish. But the president of the United States today, Joe Biden, he called himself a Zionist. And he said, I asked my father, do you have to be Jewish to be Zionist? And my father said, no. And he said he is a Zionist. And he made another statement. If Israel did not exist, we would have to create, the United States would have to create an Israel for American interests in the region. So it's important to see this, that today Christian Zionists, unfortunately, control and push the agenda of the American policy together with Jewish Zionists, with the Zionist lobby in the United States. And what we saw with Donald Trump and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is how these two projects have been brought together. Okay.
Okay, we have 3 more questions. We should allow less than 3 minutes for each, inshallah. A quick question. Is Jerusalem under occupation besides Eastern Jerusalem?
Yeah, can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, is Jerusalem under occupation besides Eastern Jerusalem?
As we said, in 1948, most of Jerusalem was brought under the Zionist state. So Western Jerusalem, about 80% of the then British Jerusalem was brought, known as Western Jerusalem, and it was occupied by the Zionist guerrillas. So it is under occupation. The other part, Eastern Jerusalem, was occupied by the Zionists in 1967. So Western Jerusalem was occupied in 1948. Eastern Jerusalem was occupied in 1967. So all of Jerusalem is under occupation. But according to international law, only Eastern Jerusalem, including the Old City, is recognized by the international community as under international law as occupied territories.
Thank you for clarifying that. There is a quick question. I think you mentioned earlier, is Masjid building covered the whole area of Masjid al-Aqsa, as big as 35 football fields?
Mhm. Yes, the area of Al Masjid Al Aqsa is 142,000 square meters, the size of 35 football fields. It's a very massive area, and all of it is regarded as a masjid in Islam. So whether you pray under the olive trees, whether you pray inside Al Jami' Al Aqsa, whether you pray inside the Dome of the Rock, wherever in the Musalla of Al Burak, in the Mihrab of Maryam, wherever you pray, all of it is regarded as Al Masjid Al Aqsa, like the Al Masjid Al Haram in Mecca. Whether you pray around the Kaaba, whether you pray behind the Ibrahim's maqam, the maqam of Ibrahim, whether you pray close to the well of Zamzam, whether you pray under the shade, within the building, all of it is known as Al Masjid Al Haram. The same also for the Mosque of Medina. All of it, particularly these three mosques, it's not just one single building, it's the whole compound, the whole kulliya or the whole compound is known as Al Masjid Al Aqsa, Al Masjid Al Haram, and Al Masjid Al Nabawi.
Okay, thank you. There is one last question. Thinking about the liberation of the land for all Palestinians, including Palestinian Christians under Zionist occupation, wouldn't it be problematic to move away from the term Palestine towards Bayt al-Maqdis?
I don't think it is problematic. Actually, if we look at it, it would revive the connection with this land in terms of for Muslims, Christians, even before Islam, and even Arabs before Islam have used the term Maqdisi and Bayt al-Maqdis. And the Christians under Muslim rule have used the terminology. Today we are stuck within the British Palestine, and this is a problem. But the idea of reviving it, the idea is to revive it amongst Muslims, the idea of Bayt al-Maqdis, because it gives the Islamic dimension to them. And actually, the Islamic dimension for Bayt al-Maqdis is also a very important part of it is the Christian. And what we saw Umar ibn Khattab did in Bayt al-Maqdis by allowing the Christians to keep their churches and to keep their houses and to keep everything as it was, something that was not accepted at within 7th century politics. Whenever anyone would come, he would destroy everything that was there in front of him. But Islam or Islamic Jerusalem or Bayt al-Maqdis, it creates this idea of a multicultural society. And the idea of reviving this terminology amongst the Muslims is an important part of keeping that connection, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you. Jazakallah khair, Dr. Khalid. We're going to end the session right now. And thank you to everyone who attended. If you have any questions, feel free to email us or send in the chat and we will check it and we can answer it in a later time, inshallah. And yeah, inshallah, we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.
Inshallah. Thank you very much, Amna, for moderating the session. And again, thanks to everyone who have attended attentively and from different parts of the world, and hope that we will continue this journey together for another 9 classes, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you.